Kate Mila Falcher. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. It's time for our Saturday book, and we are making our way through this wonderful book, The Real Marilyn Monroe by Larry Jordan. It's not a book, it's a tome. It's wonderful. This book is so well researched, and if feedback means anything, you guys are really enjoying it, and it's very entertaining, full of little tidbits of stuff that I never knew. Of course, I didn't know a lot about Marilyn Monroe. But this is video number 5. And 1 and 2, we did 2 Saturdays ago. 3 and 4, I did last Saturday. And today we'll do a couple. And we'll just see what kind of progress we're making. I don't want to torture people who are interested in maybe something different. So we'll just see how this proceeds. But let's just start and see how far we can get today. So this is video number 5, and we're starting chapter 14, which is called In 1956 Becomes Mrs. Miller. So she got a role in the movie Bus Stop, and her production company would be instrumental in doing a lot of the background stuff. So she now steps out of being minor roles. Now she's got a very important role, and she's also involved in the production of the movie. I watched Bus Stop yesterday. I'll tell you what I think when we get to the end of this. Before filming, which would begin in March of '56, she stayed in New York City with Arthur Miller. She begged him not to break up the family, not to break up his family, because he was married. It's interesting, and people are complicated, and she would have a relationship with a married man, but she didn't want him to abandon his wife and children. She didn't have expectations that he would do that for her. She thought that that was wrong. And it's hard to reconcile this contradiction that she repeated over the years. This happened more than once. It was okay to be somebody's mistress who was a married man, but he should stay married. February of '56, she agreed to begin filming The Prince and the Showgirl in July in London. So now she's got a narrow window to do Bus Stop. It was announced 3 days later, and some of the press just didn't take her seriously. Marilyn Monroe is going to London to act in a movie with Laurence Olivier. Right, tell me another one. Kim Novak wrote Marilyn Monroe a 9-page letter begging to be in anything put on by Marilyn Monroe Productions. So what you see unrolling here is this dichotomy, this contradictory narrative running parallel, partly she played into it, for sure. The sort of ditzy blonde sex kitten with not great roles, the astute businesswoman who was so respected by real actors. And we're not talking necessarily, although sometimes they were, stars, but people who really appreciated stage acting, thought she was wonderful. People in Hollywood had a different opinion. Unfortunately, she was malleable. She was easily manipulated, and we'll talk about that quite a bit as we move forward. Walter Winchell, big old gossip, wrote that Marilyn Monroe associated with communists, and coincidentally, he was a friend of Joe DiMaggio's and Hoover, and so the implication being that in defense of his friend Joe, whom she's broken up with, let's badmouth Marilyn. And it's actually true. She had a lot of friends in her circle who were kind of intellectuals and who were at some point in their lives into at least pro forma membership in the Communist Party. Some of them, you hear stories, especially in the 20s and early 30s, it was quite fashionable to belong to the Communist Party. and it didn't have that same sort of reputation that it has now, association. Now it's the great demon. But in those days, no, it was more about trying to help the ordinary worker. And people would go to Hollywood parties, and they would have a place for all the guests to sign up, and all the friends would do it in a group, not really having an ideological axe to grind. They just did it because everybody else was doing it. Never a good idea. And it came back to haunt many of them during the McCarthy era. Oh, speaking of McCarthy, the next paragraph. McCarthy focused on government officials and celebrities. Wild accusations were made about people that ruined lives. They got blacklisted. They couldn't work in their chosen fields. I remember some of them moved to Mexico. I'm trying to remember who it was that moved to Mexico to do screenwriting. A lot of people, not a lot of people, but some very famous screenwriters and authors found other people to present their work under their name and kind of do it anonymously, so because they were blacklisted. And that doesn't mean that they were active against the United States government. It just means that at some point in time they put her name on a list, and came back to haunt them. There was an FBI file on Miller that had been put together in 1947 because he went to Simon & Schuster meetings about right-wing propaganda. Now, so here is this publishing company that's concerned about propaganda, and he went to those meetings, therefore he was in trouble. Winchell called both Marilyn and Arthur Miller communist sympathizers, but see, he was a good friend of Joe DiMaggio's, so he had reason to do something like that. Miller was called to testify. He refused to testify in front of the committee. He refused to talk. The studio started to sweat, and they really begged her, they urged her to break up with Miller, stop seeing him. And her reply to them was, "You're born cowards." For the rest of her life, she was under FBI surveillance. This is not speculation. There's proof. And especially when she was dating JFK, which we'll get to. And many files are missing from her files. There's gaps in her files, which has been proven under FOIA, Freedom of Information Act claims. She returned to Hollywood in February of 1956 and rented a house with the Greens nearby. This is her friend Milton Green, close to the Fox studio, and she paid $950 a month for it. It was fully furnished. It was a temporary rental. In 3 months, this house got trashed. Oh, I forgot. The Greens weren't nearby. They lived in the same house. They shared a house. And the house was trashed. Now, the Greens were known for throwing really, really wild parties. And the owner of the house, from whom the Greens and Marilyn sublet, was very upset. Natasha, her coach, tried to reestablish ties. After 7 years as a coach and a friend, she had backed off because of the Strasburgs, who really didn't like her. And it was their psychological domination of Marilyn that she protested, and that caused the friction. Years later, a writer said that Marilyn Monroe and Natasha had an affair. And Natasha was bi, but Marilyn Monroe was put off by the fact that she was jealous of the men that Marilyn dated. And it was an aspersion that wasn't founded in any sort of real evidence. It was just another attempt to badmouth her. Natasha got cancer and had to fight to keep her job with Fox, and Marilyn didn't help her. She went to Marilyn's house. She was blocked by Wasserman from MCA. She saw Marilyn Monroe standing in a window upstairs, and that was the last time she ever saw her. And I think it's really important to remember that Marilyn was very much under the control of these other people. After she died, Natasha told salacious stories to the English press, and there was nothing anybody could do about it because Marilyn was dead. Paula Strasberg was on the set now with Marilyn Monroe, and she was manipulative, intrusive, and greedy. And a lot of people have a lot of things to say about her, and they were not terribly flattering. She very obviously nurtured a deep dependence on her in Marilyn. Okay, let's see what I thought was important here. Arthur Miller offered a perspicacious assessment of Paula and Lee Strasberg. He said that they were poisonous and vacuous, and he detested Marilyn's nearly religious dependency on them. Referring to Paula, Miller opined, quote, "She didn't know any more about acting than the cleaning woman. She was a hoax, but so successful in making herself necessary to people like Marilyn that she created this tremendous reputation." The director of Bus Stop was Joshua Logan, and his attitude was, "Oh, no, not Marilyn Monroe. She can't act." But then he said he worked with her, and he found her to be one of the greatest talents of all time. Marilyn was concerned with every detail of the production. She played the role as rough around the edges as she could. She wore out-of-date clothes. She tore her costumes to make them look, secondhand, not in good shape. She got Whitey Snyder, her makeup guy, to make her very pale and make her look tired and unhealthy. And she did. She took on a hillbilly accent. It was very good. She sang tone deaf. Oh my God. Her singing in this movie is awful. And you think, if you didn't know better, you would think, this woman tried to have a career singing. Are you kidding me? No, it's hard to sing off key when you're a good singer. It's very difficult to make it sound as bad as she sounded. She sang That Old Black Magic cold, like without rehearsal, off key, and with vaudevillian gestures. You have to see it. It's just incredible. Logan, the director, said she had an instinctive comic genius. She came up with the character's nuances all by herself, and they were quite believable. She was the most talented motion picture actress of her day. This is Logan saying this. He was exuberant in his appreciation of her skills, as well as her talent as a co-producer. He felt she was the most talented motion picture actress of her day. Warm, witty, extremely bright, and totally involved in her work. He went so far as to rave, quote, "I'd say she was the greatest artist I ever worked with in my entire career. Hollywood shamelessly wasted her." She did many takes, and many actors and actresses did many takes, but she was singled out for criticism, even though she didn't often do way more takes than other people. But she did many takes because she was a perfectionist. They had to patch the film together from fragments of scenes because it just wasn't very smooth in the filming. But what they pieced together was a brilliant performance for her. And after filming, she went to the hospital with a bronchial infection. In 2012, Don Murray, now he played against her as the lead male, and I have to say that I absolutely despised his character. Not just the character in the story, but just over the top. I didn't like him. And he was the guy who starred on Broadway in it. And they brought him to Hollywood to revisit the role. Well, we'll talk about it. So Don Murray called her the most incandescently unforgettable star in the history of the movies. And if you see her as the talent-challenged singer in Bus Stop, you'll see that. While movie lovers like you have made her famous, she has achieved her greatest ambition and made herself wonderful. She was the best thing in the movie. Absolutely no doubt about it. She would get on time to the studio, but then she would drag her feet coming out of her dressing room and getting onto the set because she was full of nerves. She was so worried that she wasn't good enough. She would break out in a full body rash and they'd have to cover her in makeup. She was cheated of the Oscar and punished for fighting the studio. Everybody agreed she deserved the Oscar. She got the Golden Globe nomination, and this time the big studios were collapsing and more movies were being produced independently. She converted to Judaism, not because of Miller, but because she actually was attracted to the belief system. A common assumption is she converted to the Jewish faith in deference to her future husband, but actually Arthur was not religious. She told Paula Strasberg, who was Jewish, that I can identify with the Jews. Everybody's out to get them, and no matter what they do, like me. Even before studying the Jewish faith, she lived and worked in what was largely a Jewish world. In Hollywood, her agent, publicist, and drama coach, Natasha, were all Jewish. There were also the powerful Jewish studio executives, Joseph Schenck, and talent agent Johnny Hyde, who had originally emigrated from the Jewish Ukraine. Several of the medical professionals that she routinely consulted were Jewish. Green and her New York City friends and Strasberg, all Jewish. She was attracted to the religion's emphasis on family, the traditions, more than anything. After she converted, her films were banned in Egypt. When Miller testified, and it was on TV, he announced that they would be married, and he set a date. And that's kind of remarkable because he hadn't really proposed and they hadn't set a date. They had not agreed on any of this. He kind of relived a little bit of a parallel script to Bus Stop. See the movie. She said, she was quoted as saying, "It was awfully nice of him to let me know about his plans. He did it to take the heat off of him because of his testimony." And she'd been to Korea, so everybody associated her with this great patriotic thing. And no one could imagine her marrying somebody who would be unpatriotic. So it was very Machiavellian of him. He used her. Her psychiatrist advised her to tell the press that it was true. And that was not in her best interest either. She was under huge pressure to get ready to go to London to film The Prince and the Showgirl. She knew that Miller made her feel inferior and was pompous and acted superior to her, and all the things I read about Arthur Miller are just horrible. She let him go ahead and plan a wedding anyway. Miller had been a psychiatric aide and had learned how to manipulate people to get them to do what he wanted, and there's value in mentioning that. Friday, June 29th, 1956, a reporter for Paris Match was rushing to interview them and crashed into a tree and was killed while trying to catch up with them. It wasn't a chase. This woman knew that they were in a car heading towards a certain place, and she was trying to get there to meet a deadline and lost control. She went into a tree and went halfway through the windshield and was killed. On the ground, she was on the ground dying while the press stood around and took photos. James Haspel, the fan extraordinaire, he was there because he was also going to whatever, I can't remember, I think it was just a press conference, and he described the whole thing. There's a YouTube video of him at the scene that you can watch. Miller and Marilyn addressed the press, really odd thing that you can watch. They got married later that day to avoid the press at the courthouse. Sunday, July the 1st, they had a traditional Jewish rite at Miller's agent's house in New York with 25 guests. Before it happened, Miller told the Greens, "I don't want to go through with it." But when she saw this reporter's death as a bad omen, she also knew it was a terrible mistake to marry Miller. To save face because of the guests, everybody invited already, arrangements made, she went through with it anyway. We can't disappoint them, she said. Miller had to borrow, this guy's a prince, he had to borrow his mother's ring because he didn't buy one for Marilyn. And they postponed their honeymoon and moved to New York City. Before filming in England, the Strasbergs appeared with an outrageous offer. Paula, from the kindness of her heart, would coach for $38,000, which is almost $500,000 today. Marilyn, this put her production company in a precarious financial position. Then her psychiatrist weighed in. These people were all kind of in cahoots, and got her to hire her. And the question is, was there some kind of financial agreement going on between the psychiatrists and the Strasbergs? They all knew each other. Manipulation and financial exploitation by therapists went on her whole life. She offered to take less money if her production company paid for the Strasbergs. Miller got them to pay his alimony. He got her production company to pay his alimony, his child support, and his expenses, and she paid these things for years for him. Then he wrote lies about Green to Marilyn, backstabbing the Greens, because he wanted to take over the production company. And at the same time, he was under surveillance, and she was under surveillance by the FBI. An anonymous call to the FBI claimed that Miller was the cultural frontman for the Communist Party, and that Marilyn Monroe's marriage was a cover-up, and that money from Marilyn Monroe's production company went to the Communist Party, and that Marilyn Monroe Productions was full of communists. Something weird going on with my screen. I hope it doesn't bother everybody. Marilyn was not a communist, but the FBI still saw those around her as a gigantic threat, and because she might say something to them inadvertently. Rumor was that she was having an affair with a KGB spy, and this was complete nonsense. And then Laurence Olivier, another jewel. I don't know how she got embroiled with these terrible, terrible people. He said she's a brilliant comedian, which to me means she's also an extremely skilled actress. Now that sounds good, right? But hang on. Also, he described Miller as cold as a refrigerated fish in his personal appearance, not like a hot lover, more like a morgue keeper left with the royal cadaver. But things get weird. She took 27 suitcases to London and had to pay $1,500 in excess weight fees because of all the luggage. Miller quoted to the press, "We both need quiet and privacy." On landing, there were 300 reporters, 2,000 plus screaming fans, 70 cops, and the English papers didn't like Miller, so they're the ones who called him the cold as a refrigerated fish. Not Olivier. Yeah. Olivier was Marilyn Monroe's employee because she hired him by her production company, but he was publicly very rude to her because his ego was annoyed that he was hired by a woman. That was one thing. He dominated press conferences at Heathrow. Every time somebody asked her a question, he answered, wouldn't let her answer. Miller and Marilyn Monroe and Paula moved into a big old estate house, and when the production began, Olivier wasted a week on rehearsals, which they didn't usually do it that way. This is not stage, you know. Olivier didn't like Paula near the set. And part of the big problem was his wife, Vivian Lee. She was jealous and notoriously unstable. She was mentally unwell. She was mentally unwell for a very long time. I don't know how much people realized that at the time. I won't guess, but she was a real problem. So one of the hairstylists says, I sensed Sir Lawrence was irritated because his co-star was coming across far better on the screen than he. And he was no doubt jealous of all the attention she was receiving in his homeland. He played mind games with Monroe, making her feel insecure by being unduly critical of every aspect of Monroe's appearance. He insisted that she not wear one dress because he claimed it was too revealing. But the hairdresser was convinced the real reason is that it was eye-catching, and the actor didn't want the audience to focus on Marilyn instead of on him. She was very perceptive, and she confronted Olivier about him giving himself more close-ups than she was getting. He told her she needed to whiten her teeth. A wonderful and much older character actress, Dame Sybil Thorndike, love her, came to Marilyn's defense. She scolded Olivier. Don't you realize what a strain this poor girl is under? She hasn't had your years of experience. She is far from home in a strange country, trying to act a strange part. Are you helping or bullying? Okay. She started mocking him, Marilyn did. She knew what he was up to. She called him Mr. Sir. And he told her, try to be sexy publicly in front of a bunch of people. And she never forgave him. He had editing rights on the movie, and he messed up the pacing of the film. I saw it a long time ago, and I didn't like it. Oh, I was going to tell you what I thought of Bus Stop. I thought, and I've said this before, and I still maintain, Marilyn was the good thing in the movie. She did a great job. Everybody else overacted, and stage productions do not translate well into films, in my opinion. Personal opinion. Lee Strasberg tried to advise Olivier how to handle Marilyn. And Olivier went out of his way to ignore all the advice and just be nasty. He tried to dominate her. He tried to compete with her while she was fighting to be taken seriously. Olivier insisted on wearing a fake nose, a mustache, and a monocle, using a fake accent, and it became a parody. It was ridiculous. And somebody asked, how could he let himself sink to such spitefulness? Marilyn was not just dealing with the stress of the film and Olivier's petulance and mean-spiritedness. She had flare-ups of endometriosis, so she was quite unwell and in pain. She accidentally discovered Miller's diary, and in his diary he had written some really horrible things about her. Very low opinion of her, a misogynist. She began to need help sleeping, taking sleeping pills. She was so upset. Miller, one of the things he said was, I thought I was marrying an angel and find I've married a whore. Haspiel, the fan, was told by Paula the real words. He wrote, my daughter is the only woman that I could ever love. Marilyn had a diary too. And she wrote, I guess I've always been deeply terrified to really be someone's wife, since I know from life one cannot love another ever, really. Starting tomorrow, I will take care of myself, for that's all I really have, and as I see it now, have ever had. However, while not working, she would throw herself into a whirlwind of domesticity when she and Arthur were at home together and try to make this undeserving man love her. But he could not love anyone but himself. He was a narcissist, a pipe-smoking, arrogant pontificator who liked to hear himself talk and routinely demeaned Marilyn. He was never a voice of conscience, as he liked to portray himself in his Pulitzer Prize work. Right? He abandoned his son Daniel, who had Down syndrome. That child became a ward of the state. Very few ever knew that he had a son. And he was not even mentioned in Miller's obituary. And Amy Green was unsparing in her critique of Arthur Miller. Arthur was a bore, a son of a creep. I saw through him the first time I met him. He early on considered Marilyn a perfectionist, an inspired gardener, a marvelous cook, and he said it was a misfortune that she never had a great role. He didn't practice what he preached, let's put it that way. He went back to the United States from London to see his children. And, he created a big scene at the airport, arriving in a limo with a lot of cops escorting him. She was hugely upset because she was pregnant. and distraught over his negative remarks in the diary. So this is terrible. Her first day back on set, she was late. Olivier treated her like a child. He took her by her hand and walked her over to Dame Sybil Thorndike and told her, "You need to apologize." And this was the response. Sybil cut Olivier short and said to Monroe, "My dear, you mustn't concern yourself. A great actress like you has other things than time on her mind, doesn't she?" Marilyn melted in appreciation, a broad smile crossing her face. Later, when a TV interviewer quizzed Thorndike, was Marilyn difficult to work with? No, not at all. She's a dear and she's a most charming person. She's got a wonderful instinct. I don't think she takes direction really well, but then I don't see why she should. Olivier wanted her to do certain things. Why don't you leave her alone? She's married to the camera. She knows exactly. She's a darling girl. I never found any difficulties with her. I don't know if anybody has. I think they must be difficult themselves, perhaps. Then she said, she turned to Olivier and said, "Larry, you did well in that scene, but with Marilyn up there, nobody will be watching you. Her manner and timing are just too delicious. And don't be hard about her tardiness, dear boy. We need her desperately. She's really the only one of us who knows how to act in front of the camera." Sad, she had a miscarriage. And Miller flew to London and then denied to the press that she was ever pregnant. He just said, "No, well, she's not pregnant." Well, technically, at this point, that was true. A low-level gopher called Colin Clark later wrote, "My week with Marilyn." And during this time is when this was set. And made all kinds of accusations about her having affairs and stuff, but she was far too sick. She just had a miscarriage. Vivian Leigh had a miscarriage around the same time, and it's interesting because she saw Marilyn as a rival in all things. Marilyn took a brief leave for therapy with Anna Freud in England, and how did Anna Freud help her to recuperate from her miscarriage? Took her on a tour of a nursery. Milton Green got his doctor to give her sedatives and stimulants. He needed to control her the way the Strasbergs and Miller did. So she was in a state of near oblivion at this point because of miscarriage and the medication. Rumors were that Milton took the drugs and later fell into addiction. He did fall into addiction, but that he took her drugs. She and Miller were not in a good place. Sammy Davis Jr. Let her borrow his apartment for an affair she was having with a photographer. Milton was making the production company deals behind her back, and he began charging expensive antiques to the production company. She felt that at this point, when she found this to be true, she felt she had no one to trust. The press was mad that she didn't have time for press appearances. Paula Strasberg had to take a short leave from London and the production because of visa issues. Marilyn and Olivier did much better together while she was gone. Fancy that. The coaches and the opportunists got in her way emotionally and creatively. Paula called and Marilyn said, Paula called and Marilyn ended up paying things for her. She was mad because she was having trouble returning. Olivier had interfered with her visa and she couldn't get back into London. Marilyn was so upset that Olivier had done this that she got him to broker a visa waiver. And this was the last chance she felt that she had to prove that she could act without a coach and without Paula. She met the Queen. Bardot saw her at this event and said she was luminous, vulnerable, beautiful. Joan Crawford, on the other hand, surprise, surprise, was hateful. You could tell which people were insecure. Crawford said, "The Queen is a lady and expects to meet other ladies." And she made it clear she was appalled by Monroe's gown and even her curtsy, despite the fact Her Majesty had commended it as very proper. Despite marrying 4 times, Crawford was bisexual and flagrantly promiscuous. I guess this was the big, not well kept secret in Hollywood. Betty Davis said that Joan, quote, slept with every star at MGM of both sexes. She apparently held a grudge because Monroe rebuffed her sexual advances. A little bit of gossip. The movie, however, under the auspices of Marilyn Monroe production, got completed early and under budget. And she apologized to all for her lateness, all the crew, and she said, "I've been sick all through the movie." And she had endometriosis, she got pregnant, she had a miscarriage, so she was really dealing with a lot. She returned to New York. Strasburgs were conspiring and conniving, and Paula was an egocentric manipulator, the book says. Now we're on chapter 15, the 1957 hiatus. In January of 57, they went to Jamaica for a delayed honeymoon. Marilyn was coerced by Miller and Lee Strasberg into suing Milton Green to dissolve their partnership, and it was one of the biggest mistakes of her life. It was a sad confluence of him becoming addicted and her being lied to. And he did not great things with the production company, too. Miller gave her an ultimatum. She could pick Miller or Green. He wanted her to take a break and told the press that she'll make one movie every 18 months, take 8 weeks to do it, and the rest of the time she'll be my wife. I wrote in the margin, gross. She'll be my wife. That's a full-time job. Miller then yelled at Green on the phone and drafted a really nasty letter to his lawyer. The fact remains that Milton Green's contribution to her career cannot be overstated. Bus Stop and The Prince and the Showgirl were finished within their budgets and were considered critical and popular successes. There were even plans for a film with Charlie Chaplin, which Miller managed to sabotage. Most of all, Green had helped free Marilyn from indentured servitude to Fox. He also performed a multitude of other important functions, not the least of which was to be the preeminent photographer to shape her public image with an awesome range of images that no other photographer has equaled. In January of 57 came the showdown. Milton offered to sell his stock back to her for $85,000. It was worth far more. Marilyn said, "Let me be the only one in your life to never take more from you." Oh, I guess he said that to her. Milton said that to her. The partnership was dissolved, and both were never the same afterwards. Nothing should have ever pulled them apart, but the people who manipulated them, lied to them, set the situation up. Green eventually destroyed himself with drugs and alcohol. Marilyn only made 3 more films after the partnership broke up, and on her last completed picture, The Misfits, written by Miller, she was heard to berate her husband one day by screaming at him, You've even taken away Milton, the only man I could trust." In February of 57, Miller was indicted for contempt because he would not name names, and he pled not guilty. He had a home in the country in Connecticut that was built in 1783 on 325 acres. So they stayed there, but Marilyn was hideously bored. Miller was a solitary writer. They were incompatible. She wanted some of his attention. That's not how he spent his day. They saw the edited print of The Prince, and she was horrified. She said it's no longer the same movie. Warner Company, Warner Brothers Company, was actually in charge of distribution, and they had ignored her points that she had given them, and she fired her attorney, she fired her accountant, and replaced them with Miller's attorney and accountant, his lawyer, a brother-in-law, and a friend. So control, separate you from other people and limit your horizons. Marilyn had been brainwashed into thinking that she needed ongoing analysis. She got a new psychiatrist, Marianne Chris. She got rid of Hohenberg at Miller's insistence because she was also Milton Green's doctor. Chris was approved by the Strasbergs. She believed that childhood trauma could have an adult impact, and this is true, but it's like picking at a scab, re-traumatizing it. Her therapy involved going back over and over and over these traumas of early childhood. And it was counterproductive. It inhibits growth. You get stuck in it. She was a doer, not a talker. The doctors wouldn't let her get on with her life. She was money in the bank for them. The more she saw them, the more they got money reimbursed. And also, the cachet of being Marilyn Monroe's therapist brought them more patients. She related with Chris and Chris's charities, Dr. Chris and Chris's charities and Chris's doctor friends in LA. And these connections, this circle of associations was disastrous. Later, Greenson in Los Angeles put her in a padded cell. We'll talk about that. The pain of reliving her childhood trauma 5 days a week with Dr. Chris, and then right after that, going to Strasberg, who wanted her to dig into her emotional background, had her stuck in the past, in past trauma, and she was reliving it over and over again. To get into she tried to get into her part by getting into her emotion, reliving the most disturbing childhood memories. And those included things like near suffocation, abandonment, abuse. These were not good memories. She became dependent again on the Strasbergs. It's kind of obvious the actor studio wasn't good for Marilyn Monroe. She was fine if she was left alone. The psychological probing was really harmful, detrimental. Miller went on trial in May of 57. Marilyn went to D.C. with him, but she didn't go to court because of the mobs. She stayed at the hotel. She stayed, not at the hotel, with Miller's lawyer. And on the last day, the press did find her. They had a hotel, but she stayed with the lawyer to put the press off the track. But they found her. His punishment was $500 fine and a month suspended, and she paid it, of course. That summer, they rented a house on Long Island with 100 acres around it. Wow. She also rented a converted windmill close by as an escape, away from New York City and away from the press that went and hounded her on Long Island. It was a relief. She attended the premiere of The Prince and the Showgirl in New York in June of 57. She was mobbed, and she had an earring taken out of her ear by somebody in the crowd, and Ed Sullivan found it for her and gave it back to her. She got a standing ovation when she entered the theater. So she got mostly good reviews. When she won the David Di Donatello Prize for Best Foreign Actress, like the Italian Oscar. She did publicity events to launch the construction on the new Time Life building in New York City. She arrived late by helicopter, so she had an astute ear, or nose, I should say, for publicity. She got Frank Lloyd Wright to design a house that they were going to build in Roxbury, Connecticut. It was 14,000 square feet. Who was going to vacuum that? That's all I want to know. But they decided that Wright's design was too impractical and very expensive, and they decided to keep the old house the way it was from the 1700s. The design got later made into a golf course in Maui in 1988 by Japanese investors. August 1st, she collapsed with an ectopic pregnancy. And I'm laughing at the comment I wrote in the margin. Miller had a press conference and said, Marilyn wants as many children as she can get. I feel the same way. She spent 10 days in the hospital, and I have to tell you, you could have most of your major organs removed and they'd send you home in 2 hours these days. It's just remarkable that she spent 10 days in the hospital. And I won't tell you what I wrote about Miller, but it's a 3-letter word that starts with A. She wrote a lovely letter to the Miller's 2 children, and she did this all the time. She remained very close to his children and to Joe's, and actually to the children of old flames, like the millionaires who were around her when she was dating. She loved them, and they loved her, and they maintained that relationship for the rest of her life, and they say such lovely things about her. At Christmas, she gave Paula Strasberg the pearls she'd got from the Emperor of Japan. She gave Lee some expensive art books, and she gave Susan, their daughter, a Chagall sketch. Now, they have a son, Johnny, and he was always, the forgotten child. Nobody ever paid any attention to him. Marilyn gave him a car. She bought she bought Miller, Arthur Miller, the latest issue of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which I would think would be a great gift, but I'm wondering if there was a message there. At year's end, the Harvard Lampoon published what it called the Thank You Award to Marilyn Monroe, who in a sweeping public service has made no movies this year. Considering she was the most popular actress in the world, it was a juvenile and hurtful statement to make. Now we're on chapter 16, the best movie comedy of all time. And it really is great. I haven't rewatched it yet because you have to pay for it. You can't get it for free. She had a contract dispute with Fox. No movies in 1957 broke the agreement. She got $100,000 for nothing, and she now owed only 2 more movies. And they renegotiated, and they got an agreement that she would do 3 movies. And in the meantime, she did photo shoots and cover photography. Hedda Hopper did a big piece on her and her apartment in New York City, her farm in Connecticut, and her desire to keep Paula Strasberg on set because, quote, she gives me confidence. I am not a quick study, Marilyn said. Hedda Hopper said Marilyn Monroe was friendly, warm, happy. Hopper had been libelous in the past. She had come very close to being sued by Marilyn Monroe. Hopper threatened her with more venom, and Marilyn Monroe backed off. She said she was going to sue her, warned her she was going to sue her, and Hopper got even nastier. And Marilyn decided to choose her battles. Marilyn was a great actress, this says, because when she met with Hopper for the interview, Hopper didn't think she held a grudge, but she did. She went to Los Angeles to talk with Billy Wilder about Some Like It Hot. And they had a press conference at Beverly Hills Hotel. And she was going to be in this movie. The shooting began August 4th, 1958. In 2000, the year 2000, the American Film Institute called it the greatest comedic motion picture in United States history. It is really good. It deals with homosexuality and cross-dressing, and it did what they call broke the back of the Hays Code, the morality police, basically. It was odd that she took the role because it was a supporting role. And again, she was a dumb blonde, but she was an astute businesswoman. Asked by a reporter, are you going to do the Jean Harlow story? Here we go again with somebody likening her to Jean Harlow. And she said, quote, I know a lot about Harlow from William Powell, right? And Ben Lyon. I want to be sure it was handled in good taste. She had respect for Jean Harlow. Another young woman who was terribly maligned. This movie was done in black and white because of the makeup that the men had to wear. It didn't look realistic enough under the lighting of color film. And it just looked, they looked green and it just didn't look good. But in black and white, it was much more persuasive. And so they made a creative decision to do a black and white film. And Wilder is a really interesting director. For example, she makes her big film entrance walking at a train station. And as she appears, steam shoots out of the train. It was her idea. She was hospitalized for exhaustion. She and Tony Curtis did not get along well. He said it's like kissing Hitler when he had to kiss her. He left her cold. She didn't like him at all. She'd wanted Sinatra in the role, but it was hard to imagine he would do drag. Very hard to imagine. Curtis resisted her and badmouthed her on Larry King. He resented her and badmouthed her on Larry King. Haspiel, faithful fan, jumped to her defense and said that she turned down millionaires in her life, and it hurt her career. She did not do what Tony Curtis implied. She didn't sleep her way to the top. She really didn't. If she liked somebody, she wasn't above doing that. But she didn't do it for money reasons, because she turned down many a millionaire, and it really hurt her career. She was often late to the set, and often the schedule ran over. She was distant to the young actress who played her roommate, and there was a rumor of a steady stream of drugs coming from the Fairfax pharmacy. And during the filming, she got pregnant, and she was thrilled. The movie has often been compared to a bigger version of a Max Sennett comedy. Wilder said people should go to the movies to have fun. Jack Lemmon said, man, can that girl wriggle? It's like Jell-O on springs with a built-in motor. That was her signature, was her walk. If you remember from the movie Niagara, there was a film, a scene where she's walking away from the camera, and so you're seeing her from behind. It's pretty entertaining. Not a comedy, by the way, film noir. She became interested in painting. She took correspondence courses, and she pursued that for the rest of her life. She collapsed on set, and it wasn't alcohol, and it wasn't pills. They didn't know she was pregnant. She didn't tell Fox that she was pregnant. And she was afraid if she told them, they would try to extend her contract time because of the delays of birth and new baby. December 17th, Parade Magazine, author Lloyd Shearer wrote a terrible hit piece about her. He talked about her being nervous on set and getting fat. Well, when you see pictures of her, you think, oh my God, if that's fat, I hate to think what myself and the rest of the world look like, how you would, talk about that. She did not look fat, and she was pregnant. He claimed in this article that fans were disillusioned by watching her work and that she was not a natural actress. And it's so untrue. Crowds used to just scream. They filmed a lot of it at the Coronado Hotel Resort in San Diego. And they had a hard time with people mobbing the outdoor scenes. he exaggerated about her salary. He said misogynistic comments like how she was a dear, sweet, sincere, adorable girl. I hope she settles down with Arthur Miller and has half a dozen children. I know she has made a wonderful wife and that she will make an even more wonderful mother, but a great actress she ain't. His stupidity was convincingly rebuked by esteemed stage actress Eva Le Gallienne, who, in the course of her career, acted in and directed more than 150 stage productions. See, the stage people always supported her and defended her. She said of Marilyn Monroe in 58, she not only has a powerful electric quality about her personality, but she's also a very fine actress. I believe that most critics have been too harsh on Miss Monroe. She has a great personal magnetism. So she had another ectopic pregnancy and lost the pregnancy. Miller's mother got involved in this now. Probably his major problem. He was a big baby, a mama's boy. Anyway, she blamed Billy Wilder. And the loss of the ectopic pregnancy on top of the loss of the last pregnancy, she developed a fine case of PTSD and had a variety of emotional responses. She tried to numb herself. She took too many pills, not to hurt herself, but because she was in, pain, and was taken to the emergency room. But then the doctor prescribed more pills for her. These are all prescription drugs, by the way. Apparently, they didn't think she was a risk to herself, you would hope, to continue to prescribe for her. So this is kind of a strange little feature. The drugs, and I'm thinking they must be opioids because they cause constipation, which opioids do. And she ended up doing numerous enemas, and that starts to get, I don't know, problematic, I guess is the word. But, and this is something else that needs to be considered, this overuse of enemas can be symptomatic of eating disorders, and we'll talk about that more later. She was hired by Life to recreate photos of 5 famous past actresses, and the comment was she was chameleon-like. They sold 6,300,000 more than any other issue in history of this Life magazine with these pictures. The photographer was Avedon. He found Marilyn easy to work with. Quote, she gave more to the still camera than every other woman I had the opportunity to photograph. He added that she was more patient with him and more demanding of herself. So that's the end of that chapter, and I will stop here. So this is the end of video number 5, and we will start with number 6 here in a minute. And I hope you're enjoying this. I just think it's so interesting, and I've been led to watch some of these older movies, and it's kind of a good time of year to take a little nostalgic trip. Try to watch Some Like It Hot. It's a great movie, really a great movie. Jack Lemmon, Tony, it's just the best. So, Slán go fóill, and I'll be right back.